What's going on, guys? My name is Amos and I'm back again with another video. So in today's video, we're going to continue with our implementation of the most awesome simple DB, I guess. Yeah, that's what we called it. We're going to be continuing with, our implementation of that. And we basically want to look at how we can do what we talked about in the previous video. We'll come up with write code for the basic interfaces for the class DB manager, and then we'll also do the event manager and things like that. And we'll actually start with the interfaces such as DB connector, DB query builder, and then DB query handler, and let's see how those are going to look. And probably in the next video, we'll see how we can use we can test our API and maybe use it in a different project. Right now, the very first thing that we're going to do here is we want to make sure that we open our favorite IDE. I'm going to be using IntelliJ IDE, or whatever it is called. I don't know how to pronounce it, so that's what we're going to be using throughout this particular video. Now, this is a different project. Don't worry about what is here, because what we're going to do now is we're going to start from scratch and create a brand new Maven project. Right, so we're going to click on project like so, and then this is going to give us this window, and I'm going to call it simple DB like so. And well, we're not going to check this box for creating Git repository. We want this to be a Maven project, and I think Java 17 is okay. Well, you can choose whatever you want to choose here. You can use Java 23 or anything like that to benefit from the newer features and things like that. So I'm just going to leave it the way it is. Then in the advanced settings here, I'm just going to leave everything as com.amos_new_render like so, as the group ID, and then leave everything else as it is. So I think everything is cool. I want to put it on my desktop. I'll put it wherever you want to put it so that it is visible. So I'm going to create, and then we give it some time to load, and that should set up our project. Now remember, if we check our architecture here, you can see that we should have a package named core. This is where the basic interfaces and the classes are going to reside. This is where they're going to come from. So I'm going to go back to my IntelliJ idea, and you can see that here in com.amos_new_render, we're going to create a new package. First of all, I'm going to call the package simple DB like so. I'm going to say simple DB, I think, like so. And then inside simple DB, we're going to create a core. It's not a class, it's actually a package. So I want to create a package, and then we're going to call this package core like so, right? And I think everything is okay. Then inside this core, we're going to create a Java class, and then we want to create an interface. We're going to call it DB connector. And then I want this to be an interface, so I'm going to have interface like so. And then we're also going to have another interface. Then we're going to call this interface DB query builder interface like so. And then we're also going to have another one. Let me just put everything here. DB I think query handler, because we already have query builder. This is also going to be an interface. And I think we're going to have event manager, Java class. This is going to be a class because we're just going to have one event manager. And then event manager, this is going to be a class, so we'll leave it the way it is like so. And then let's also have the class DB manager. So these are the things we'll be working on. DB manager. Actually, let's call it DB connection manager. All right, I think that's more descriptive. DB connection manager, like so. Now let's start with the DB connector interface. So let's start with the DB connector interface. Let's also create an enum DB type, the enum DB type. So we're just going to say DB type. I think that looks good, but maybe we should say DB type like so. Then this is going to be an enum like so. Now let's start with DB connector. So remember, this interface is going to contain methods such as connect and disconnect. right? It is going to contain interfaces such as connect and disconnect that allow us to connect to a database and also and also disconnect from that particular database. So for connecting and for closing that connection to the database. So remember that later on we want to add support for non-SQL databases. So in the case of the relational databases, we'll need to return a connection, and then from that connection we'll be able to write queries, add things to our databases and to our tables and things like that. So we need to return a connection. In the case of MongoDB, we need to return a Mongo client. In the case of, for example, maybe Redis, would need to return JDBC if our API is going to wrap around JDBC. So what we want to do here is we want our connect methods to be very flexible. So our connect method should return object, and then in the correct connector, in the correct connector, we'll do the appropriate cast, right? So we want it to be flexible, so we're going to return object. So this is going to be the connect method, like so. And then we'll also have another method, disconnect, right? So void disconnect, or we can call it close, or whatever we want to call it, right? So we're going to call this method disconnect, like so, right? So these are the two methods that we need, and probably this will later on we'll try to make this implement the interface auto closable, so that when we have a connection, for example, we can close it automatically because we're going to use it in a try with resources block, and that should help us with closing the resources. We know that with try with resources, we have to implement the auto closable interface and override the close method, right? So for now, this is how our interface looks. So the appropriate connector is going to provide the implementation for the connect method and also the implementation for the disconnect method. So this is what we're going to have in this particular interface. So that's what we have to have. And then the next, this is actually also, it's very easy, because what we have now here is an enum of all the databases that we are supporting. So we'll say MySQL, like so, as one of the databases that we are supporting. Oracle is also supported by JDBC. PostgreSQL is also supported. SQL Server is one of the databases that we are supporting, and maybe we can also have MongoDB, so we can just put it there. And then we can also have SQLite, SQLite, because that's also very, very important, right? And SQLite is very easy to work with. So we'll be testing with SQLite and MySQL. So in the case of MySQL, we'll install XAMPP, or however you pronounce it, and with PHPMyAdmin, we'll be able to have a graphical user interface and see our database, and sort of have that easier way of working with the database and seeing the different things that we are doing to the different changes that our databases has been subjected to. So this is the DB type. We just list this is a simple enum. Of course, we can make it as complicated as we want, and of course that might happen later in the video, but for now we just want to have the simple structure set up and use that in our project, in another project, right? Or maybe work with that for now. So this is a simple enum, right? So we have DB connector, okay, with two methods, connect and disconnect, returning object here because we want to make it flexible. And then DB type lists all the databases that we're going to support, right? Then we can also support something like Redis. I think we can also do Redis or Cassandra or anything like that. So this is what we have here. So DB connector. Now let's look at the DB query builder. So remember that the DB query builder, and for now, let's just worry about relational databases. So we'll need a query, right? We need a query. So we'll say query, we need a method query, and all the methods here in an interface are going to be public abstract. Okay, the abstract methods that are public, right? And we'll have to, if we don't provide something like public abstract or something like that, it's going to be like that by default. But what I'm looking for here is I'm going to get rid of the public, and so that it's cleaner, and then it's going to return a DB query builder, and I want to work with the query. Now this is where they'll provide a query they'll provide something like this. They'll call this method and then provide something like this. Maybe select everything from let's say students, like so, where name is equal to maybe let's say where name is equal to Amos or John or Bob, like so, something like this. So this is how they're going to use this method. Now I want them to be able to do something like this. Where they'll provide they'll say here, they'll say %s, and then they'll provide the appropriate argument that is going to be substituted here. So here they might say, might provide the string Bob, just to help them, simplify, query writing and things like that. So I want them to do this. So I'm going to overload this particular method. Let me first of all revert back to this, I think, is equal to Bob, like so. And then of course they have to sort of like escape this. If they want to use those, they have to sort of like escape this, because this entire thing is going to be in quotes like this, I think. Yeah, something like this. Okay, so something like this is what we're going to have. But then I'm just going to say Bob, like so, and I'm not going to worry about that for now. Now I'm just going to sort of like overload builder like so, and then I want to take in a query, and I think this is still going to be a string, like so, query, and then we'll say object, and then dot, 3 dots, and then params. This is going to give me like an array of arguments. So when I call this function, so here we have a problem. So it's supposed to be string, and of course we have a typo, so it's query, like so, right? So here all the arguments that are going to provide are going to be in an array. So we'll be able to like loop through all those arguments they've provided and make the appropriate substitutions for us to be able to build a query like so. We want to do something like, and let's get rid of that. We want to be able to do something like this, where they'll be able to say select, like so, everything, select everything from students where name is equal to something like %s, and then they'll provide the argument. For example, let's say they'll provide Bob, and then we'll grab this Bob here and substitute it here where we have this %s, right? And that is what we want to do. And we need a method that is going to help us to come up with the handler from the query builder, because the handler is what is going to execute the query, right? So we need to return, and we need to be able to have an instance of the query handler. So finally here we're going to have a DB, then we're going to call it query, I think, handler, like so, and then we're going to call them, the method is going to be build, but then build is not very it's too general, and it's very hard to know what the method build is doing. But build handler tells us that we're building a handler here. So this is like the basic structure of our DB query builder, right? So we have DB type now, DB connector, DB query builder. Let's look at the DB query handler and all the methods. Remember that the DB query handler is what is going to execute the query, right? And then we'll be chaining these things. We'll be chaining these methods. So I want a method that returns so query handler, like so. This time I don't want query. Remember that we have those we had those methods with connector, the methods that we're going to use for injecting the connector. If you've forgotten, let me just quickly go back here. So here, if you look at this part here, so we have these methods with connector and with event manager. that we use to sort of like inject the connector we are using here and the event manager we are using here, right? So with connector, so we'll be chaining these methods. That's why at each particular, we need to return, the same type here, which is DB query handler, like so, right? And then here we need, because we'll be injecting the DB connector, so we'll need a DB connector, like so, right? So we'll do the same thing with the with event manager. So I'm going to go query handler, like so, and then I'm going to say with event manager, I think, like so. And then now here we need event manager, like so, event manager, like so, right? Let's have methods like, get entries and things like that. So remember that for get entries, that is going to return the rows. And so this is going to be list of map, like so. And then all the columns will be strings. So we'll say string, like so. String and then object here, because the columns might have different things. We can have columns that have values, columns that have floats, columns that have strings, columns that have integers and things like that, right? And then what I want to do here is I'm going to say import so we're going to say import java.util from java.util, like so. We import everything, and that should get rid of that error, right? All right, so get entries, and then I'm going to overload this method where we need to have like a limit. If they want to return maybe 4 rows or something like that, if the number of rows is less than the limit that we've passed in here, if the number of rows in the actual database is less than the limit that we've passed in here, we're going to return everything, right? So this is what we basically want to, do. So we've overloaded the method get entries. And then we can also have the method get field names, and then that should just be a list of all the fields that we have. In the case of MySQL, it is the columns of our table, right? It is the columns of our table. So we basically say get fields, maybe field names, like so. So it's basically a list of all the fields that we have there. We can also, it's going to be an array list, right? Because it's dynamic. And we might have tables that have like many rows. And then if we want to get like the values, we would have something like this, right? So this would give us all the values, all the values a particular column has, for example. Maybe if we have a name column, for example, if we have something like this, let me just show you. If we have a table like this, name, maybe let's say F name, and then if I do L name, like so, and then if we have something like 1, and then if we have, let's do this, if we have something like Bob, and then if we have something, then here we can have Doe, like so, and then here we can have like John, and then here we can have like Doe, like so. So you see, if I use this method here, get field values, and pass in the field name, first name, like so. So if I do something like this, if I do something like this, if I do something like get, let me just maybe comment this. So if I say get field values, like so, and pass in my F name here, like so, as a string, if I pass in my first name as a string, it should give me a list that contains the first names, all right, of all the users in the database, for example, if this is the user table, something like that. So this is very useful, right? This is very useful. So let's also have methods like insert, for example. Let's also have methods like insert. I think to make it easier, the method is going to return a boolean, right? It's going to return a boolean that is going to tell us whether the insertion has happened or not. And maybe we can actually return int, and this would return the number of rows that have been modified. Okay, this would return the number of rows that have been modified. All right, so it's actually better to like do that. So if it returns a negative number, then nothing has happened. If it returns a negative number, then nothing has happened. Then just to simplify everything, I want the user to provide everything in a map, like so, right? In a map. So a map will look like this. So here we'll have like, the key will be the column, okay, the target column. The key will be the target column. So for example, the key will be the target column, and then the value is going to be, so here the key is the target column. How do you, so it's column like so, and then the value is the, or the value we are supposed to insert, the value to insert like so. So we'll have this map, and maybe we can handle later on, we can look at how we can do this recursively. For example, if they want to, if in the case of documents, for example, NoSQL databases like MongoDB, for example, we might have a complex structure that we want to insert instead of just, you know, this simple thing where we have like the target column and the value to insert. We might want to also like do this recursively and things like that. So that is something to do in a later video, right? And of course, hopefully you get the gist. Okay, so this is the insert method. So we'll also have a delete method and all that. Hopefully you get where we're going to, where we're going now. Now let's also do a delete method, because we are interested in the CRUD operations we can perform on the databases. So here we get the information. So let's look at the other method that we need. Even the update is going to take in a map, and for the update, we actually need one more thing. Instead of entry, I want to call this updates, like so. So it's more clear. So updates, like so. And then remember that for updating, we generally write queries like update, maybe update students, set, maybe name, where, something. And then in the where clause, we use maybe the primary key of that particular table to sort of like update the correct row, right? And so we probably are going to need an ID, and since it's a column, I think I'm going to say ID. I might change it to object if I like have problems later on. So this is what we need for the update. Well, for the delete, I think we just need the ID. We provide more overloads in case we need to do multiple things. So we have insertion, we have delete. We can delete things through this particular method. We can get the information. We can create yeah, I think that's all. That's all. Then we can get the field names and things like that. And right. So this makes sense. Right. Get field values. Yeah. So this is our DB query builder. So we have it. This is our DB query handler, like so. This is our DB query handler. So this is responsible for executing. This is responsible for executing the query. This is responsible for executing the query, right? Using the connection, in the case of MySQL, using the connection that we'll get from this connector. And here we are injecting the connector here with this particular method, with connector. And then we are injecting the event manager with this, so that we can keep track of all the events. So let's look at how we can like implement the event manager here. So here we're going to use the observer pattern. The observer pattern is what we're going to use. If you don't know what the observer pattern is, I think let me just help here. I think the observer pattern in Java, like so, should give us, yeah, so you can read any of this, so you can like read the Geeks for Geeks page here, where we have things like the subject. So our subject in this case is the event manager, and then the subject maintains a list of observers. So it keeps it has a list of everything or of every component that is listening for a particular event. It has a list of those things. And then everything that is listening for some event is an observer. Defines an interface with an update method. Our update method in this case is going to be the onEvent method. So I'm going to provide this in the link to this in the description. So we'll come up with something like this, a structure like this. So our event manager is going to keep track of all the components in our application that are listening for events, right? So what events can we have in this particular case? So we can have events such as an insertion, and the payload or the extra information would want to maybe display in the console maybe the number of rows, the number of insertions we've made. For example, if we've updated or modified 4 columns by performing some insertion, then the extra information would provide in the message that we're going to like write to the console is like the number of insertions we've made, and that is going to be through the method notify. So since it keeps track of all the observers of all the components in our application that are listening for insert events, delete events, and many other events, if then there's it can notify those particular components if a particular event happens, right? If a particular event happens, then it's going to notify everyone in the list here that is listening for everyone that is listening for maybe the insert event, because not all the components in our system will be listening for the insert events. We can have components that only listen for maybe the deletion, the delete events, or maybe the update events and things like that. So we'll have to have that, and then we register a component, or we add it to the list of observers by calling the add observer and remove observer. We just change the way, the nomenclature and things like that, and come up with something that is more that is related to what we are doing, right? So we have a class like this. Remember, we must have a list of our list is going to be a little bit more it's not necessarily a list, it's rather it's going to be a map, right? Then the first part, the key is going to be the event that we are listening to, right? The key is going to be the event that we are listening for. And to be able to do that, I think we need an enum. We need an enum, and then we're going to call it event type. So I'm just going to put it in the core, right? I'll just put it in the core. And Java, and then I'm going to say event type here, like so. And then this is going to be an enum, like so. And then let's look at what events are we listening for. What events are we listening for? So the events that we are listening for, we're looking at the insert, update, and delete for now. And then we can also add, I think, when a connection to the database has been established. Connection, so we can just say connection established, and then when a connection has been closed or something like that, so we can have connection closed, like so, closed when we disconnect from there. And then we can have maybe connection error when we fail to connect to the database. We can have connection error and something like that. So these are the events that we'll be listening for. So delete, update, when we establish a connection, when a connection is closed, and then when we have an error. So when an insertion is performed, like so, this is when performed. I think we are missing something here. And then the second one is when we update an entry, like so. That's when the event occurs. And then here, when we delete an entry, this one is when we connect to the database, like so. And then this is when we disconnect, right, from the database, database like so, and then this is failed when we fail to connect to the database. As simple as that. So we'll add more events as we go on. So then here we'll have a map. So I'm going to say private I think, yeah, it's going to be a map, so it's going to be private and then map like so. And then the very first thing that we probably have to import java.util. And I'm just going to say star just for now like so. So what we need here is we need the event type as the key, and then we will need the event listener. All right, we need the event listener here. Now here we must have a list, because in the case of the insert event, for example, we can have many event listeners that are listening. We can have many event listeners that are listening for this particular event, and so we'll put all those listeners in a list, right? List and then event listener. So an event listener is going to be an observer, right? An observer. Generally, you would say a list of observers, but now I'm trying to change the nomenclature a bit so that it matches what we are doing here. So we'll have a private that, and then we can have listeners, but okay, we can actually call them observers like so. Or if we want to match what we are doing, we can say listeners. And then this is actually going to be a new, we can do hash map, but then I want us to do a concurrent hash map because that's actually thread safe, right? That's thread safe. And we can just do this. So we can have a concurrent hash map like so. Then in the constructor, we'll actually call this in the DB manager, right? So in the constructor, we want to provide, a list of events, an array of events, right? An array of event types. Now, why do we need this? So we'll see why when we sort of like so we'll say operations, or we can just say types, for example. Types is better. Like so, types. And this is not event type, but event type, like so. So these are the types. So all the types that we want to like register, okay? All the types that we want to register. Now we'll loop through all the types. So for type in type, so we'll use the for each type. And then remember that here we have a list, right? So if we do array list, so this is going to work, right? So because here we have a list of event listeners. Now, what is this event listener that we have here? Let's define it. So this event listener is an interface, right? Is an interface. Then it will have concrete classes that are going to implement this particular interface. So every observer or every listener is going to implement the event listener interface. So these classes, I think, these will move to the event, package instead of the core package. So event listener, then this is going to be an interface like so, right? This is going to be an interface. So it's going to have the onEvent method. So void onEvent, then this is the method. We'll call this method in the event manager, in the event manager class via the notify method. We'll call it in the notify method, so that when an event occurs, this is the method that is going to get code, right? This method will get code, and this is what is actually going to notify whoever is listening for the particular event. Now, if all this is confusing, you can go ahead and Google and look at the observer pattern. And if you understand the observer pattern, you easily understand what is happening here. Now, I didn't actually mean to do that. Now, we'll overload this particular method because when this event happens, we might also want to pass in, additional information. For example, in the case of an insertion, we'd want to know how many rows we updated when we inserted the data, right? So we should also provide a payload. We should also provide the payload, right? and it's going to be an array of, the extra information that we're going to like pass in. So if we want to pass in the number of, maybe the time it took to execute that particular query, the number of rows that we updated and things like that. So all that information is going to be captured through this, second version. So we have this overload here. Right, so we've defined what event listener is. We've defined what event listener is, right? And if I go here, so this is what event listener is. Right. So here, when we call the constructor, we'll register. We'll call this in the DB connection manager class. In the constructor of the DB connection manager class, and then we'll register we'll initialize all these, array lists. This is an empty array list, sorry. So this is going to do this for every type that we're going to provide. Is going to come up with this particular thing. Right, so that's the constructor. Let's develop the add observer method, the remove observer method, and also the notify method. Okay. Now instead of having add observer, we're going to say public void add listener is better. Add listener is better because here we're talking about listeners. So add listener, we'll add a listener for a particular event. So remember here we have empty array lists, okay? Empty array lists with types. So here they'll provide the type, like so. They'll provide the type, and then the event listener, the observer we want to register here, right? The observer we want to register here. Great job, right? So what we can actually do here is we'll have a list, like so. This is going to be, we'll get the list. Remember here they'll provide a type, right? They'll provide a type. So we need to get the correct list. We need to add this observer. We need to add this observer listener to the correct list. And how do we know the correct list to add the observer to? It is via the event type that we have here. So we'll get the correct list via the event type. Right, and then here we want to do list.add, list.add listener, just like that. So we also have the method unsubscribe or remove listener, like so. Now, how do we remove a listener? So same thing, we get the correct list and then we remove the listener, like so. Okay, we get the correct list based on the type, and then we remove the listener just like this. Now let's have the notify method. Let's define the notify method. The notify method is going to have two versions. There will be one notify method that is going to call this version, this on event version, and another notify method that is going to call and an overload of the first notification of the first notify method that is going to call this on event that we have here. Now, if all this is complicated, again, you can look at the observer pattern, right? And I'm actually going to like stop the video just after, just after finalizing the event manager class, because it's going to be very long, and we'll do the DB connection manager later on and the testing in a separate video. So we'll have void, but we need to have a notify event, or let's just call it notify. All right, we can just call it notify, like so. There will be one version here that is going to take in the payload. I don't want to call it ags. I want to say payload, like so. And then there will be another version. There will be another version, so void notify, like so. And then this one will just take in the event type, like so. Okay. Right. So for a particular event type, we'll get the appropriate list. Okay, we'll get the appropriate list of events. And then for every event, for every listener in this particular list, we'll go ahead and call this on event. Method. Okay, it calls this method that we have here. Right, it calls this method that we have here. So same thing here, same thing that we have here. So let's get the list. Like so, we get the list. And then for everything that we have here, we want to call the second version. For every listener that we have here, we want to call the the second version here. So it notifies with, and then it passes that extra information. So all these methods will be used appropriately. Okay, all these methods will be used appropriately. So here in the DB query handler, when we inject the event manager, we'll have access to all these methods: the notify method, the remove listener, add listener, and things like that. We'll have access to all these methods, right? We'll have access to these methods. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.